Hello, everyone. First of all, thank you for listening. Second, all of my work as a podcaster and Buddhist meditation instructor is all donation-based. So if you get something out of this talk and you would like to contribute, you can Venmo me at Gulf Coast Dharma. Anyway, thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy. It sounds like we all fear a lot of the same things. Money issues, worries over our children, if you have children, worries over other people's children, if you're close to them, losing people we care about, sickness, death. Sounds pretty familiar. Sounds a lot like what the Buddha talked about in the setting of the wheel of Dharma into motion. And so the reason I did this exercise is because tonight I want to talk about fear and anxiety. And the topic of tonight's talk is, the title, I should say, is Fear and Loathing at Buccee's, or Truckstop, Brahma, Viharas, whichever you prefer. And so now that we've all shared some of our fears and kind of got that out in the open and realized that we're all people and we all fear a lot of the same things. I'd like to talk about fear and anxiety, offer some personal reflections on both of those, what the Buddha said about how to deal with them, and some practical ways to shift them into a more positive experience. So what is fear? Well, fear is the feeling that we get when confronting a situation that we perceive as potentially dangerous. This can be either physical, psychological, or emotional harm. It's not limited to just the physical. Anytime we're in a situation that we perceive as threatening, it triggers this response from our amygdala. We get into the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response. And depending on your particular psychology and your conditioning, that's the response that you'll have. And the threat that is presented to us can either be real or imagined. Doesn't really matter. The brain doesn't care. It makes no difference. If we imagine it, it's just as real as though we experienced it a lot of the time. And while I think that classically we view fear as a negative emotion, it does have a lot of positives to it. We survived because of fear. We wouldn't be here as a species if it wasn't for fear protecting us, because it does mobilize us in situations of danger. And so it can serve a purpose, but it can also hold us back in a lot of ways. It can prevent us from being our true selves and for pursuing our dreams, for pursuing our aspirations, and stepping out of our comfort zone a lot of times. There are three distinct types of fear. There's primal fear. These are inherited threats. They're ancestral. These are passed down. Things like snakes, spiders, bears, lions, any large predator. The dark, humiliation, also a primal ancestral fear, because we are a social species. As Gita mentioned, and whoever's fear that was, our survival depended on our social standing. And so humiliation meant that we would be ostracized from the group. And I get that, for sure. When I played music, I had a lot of fear around that when I first started playing, professionally, trying to play professionally anyway. Fear of being judged, fear of humiliation, and a lot of that came from my own insecurities, but there is that fear there. And so once I finally got comfortable with that, which took a long time for me to actually be able to get comfortable with that without drinking. And I would always use alcohol as a crutch, liquid courage. Have the first couple drinks, and I was good to go. Of course, first couple drinks turned into a couple more and a couple more and a couple more. And eventually I had to stop playing music professionally because I was drinking far too much and putting myself and others in danger. But I thought that my experience with playing music, playing on stage in front of people would transfer pretty easily to doing groups and leading groups. And that was not my experience at all, actually. It's a completely different thing. At least when you have a guitar, you have something to hide behind. And here I don't. So when I first started doing this group, As some of you who came early on probably noticed, I was a little nervous. I would get a lot of stage fright when I first started doing this, and it's only through repetition, I think, that I was able to work through that. Public speaking is probably one of the top fears. I know for a long time when people were polled on this, public speaking was the number one fear that people had over death. So people feared speaking in public more than they actually feared dying.
I've actually started my own protest and been too nervous to speak at it.
Yeah.
You get hundreds of people there. It's like,
what do I do now?
hey, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, and like I said, I had a lot of discursive thoughts show up when I first started doing this group. I had I guess what I would call imposter syndrome. I felt like, why do I deserve to be up here talking to everyone? I felt like a fake and a fraud, and I thought everybody else would see that too. But I've come to realize that I'm not a fake and I'm not a fraud, and I do actually know what I'm talking about just a little bit. And I think hopefully everybody sees that part and not the imposter syndrome part. I felt like nobody was going to show up, and if they did, that they would know. They're going to know. And all these thoughts and emotions that I had, surrounding this and sitting up here doing this, were just because I wanted to do a good job. I don't think I would have felt the way I felt if I didn't care so much about it. But I do care. I care about this practice, and I care about all of you, and I want to do the best job that I can, and hopefully I am. And that it caused a lot of anxiety for me. Like, I worried over every talk that I would give. While I was writing the talk and preparing it, I would stress over it, and then when I got here, I would stress even more. When people started actually showing up, I was like, oh God, what am I going to do? But it seems to have worked out. And so that's primal fear. It's these ancestral fears, things that benefited our survival initially. There's rational fear. And this is the times when our fear is actually justified. If you have a gun pointed at your head, you're afraid of being shot, well, that's a rational fear. If you're camping in the middle of the wilderness, then snakes and bears and things like that are perfectly rational to be afraid of those. If we're on a sinking boat, then the fear of drowning is very real and probably very justified, and that would be considered a rational fear. It's kind of like 2 + 2 = 4. Like, of course you would be afraid of that. Today, the disparity between the amount of money that we make and the rising cost of literally everything can cause a lot of fear. And that's a rational fear. The fear of losing your job and losing your home could be very real to you. And that as well is a rational fear. And when I was arrested in 2014, and I was looking at a 25 minimum mandatory sentence, and all this uncertainty over my future and what was going to happen created a lot of fear and a lot of anxiety, and perfectly rational. The rest of my life was pretty much hanging in the balance at that point, so I feel like that was a rational fear. But Alan Watts has this wonderful quote about anxiety: is that no amount of worry about the future is going to stop what's going to happen from happening. We can sit and we can worry, but it's not going to change what's going to happen from happening. So ultimately, anxiety is just kind of a dead-end road. I mean, that doesn't, even intellectualizing that and knowing that doesn't make it any less. It doesn't stop it from happening, obviously, but it is a little irrational to be anxious over things out of our control. Then there's irrational fear. And this is fear that's completely unjustified. As I said, if you're camping in the middle of the woods, then, it's dark, and there's bears, and there's bobcats, and mountain lions, and all kinds of shit out there that you should probably be afraid of. But if you're sitting on your couch and watching Netflix, I don't think fear of a bear attack is really rational. That's a pretty irrational fear to have if you're in your house worrying about bears.
But clowns can strike anywhere.
That's true. And they come up through the toilet, which is even more scary. And the anxiety that you experience surrounding your fear of the bear in your living room, probably a little irrational. Have any of you been to Buc-ee's?
Yes.
Yeah. So I have this irrational fear and anxiety of Buc-ee's. Or I did at one point. It's kind of quelled itself a little bit, but
That place makes me anxious too.
Same.
I think it makes everybody a little anxious. And I'm not sure what it was, honestly. I mean,
I think they just pump endorphins through the air vents to just get everyone's blood moving so you can get in and get out as quick as you can.
I think they must do that on the interstate on the way there, because before I even get in the parking lot, I feel activated. I mean, the place is utter chaos.
It's like a beehive.
Yeah, absolutely. And the parking lot's a nightmare. There's like 200 gas pumps, literally 200 gas pumps, just as many parking spaces. So trying to navigate the parking lot is a chore in and of itself.
It's like a Las Vegas gas station.
It is. It
Las
is.
Vegas gas station mall.
It's like a casino had sex with a Cracker Barrel or something. And I've seen people get into wrecks in the parking lot. I've seen people almost get into fights in the parking lot. I've seen a lot of crazy shit at Buc-ee's. It's very much like a casino in that respect. So basically, Buc-ee's just seems to bring out the absolute worst in people. And it used to do the same for me. It made all of my conditions, psychological and emotional responses, just bubble to the surface. And from the moment I would get off the interstate, I would feel activated immediately. I would start to sweat and my heart would start beating faster. And, with the mindfulness practice, I can watch this happening and it's like, okay, Buc-ee's. I know why it's happening. I'm going to Buc-ee's and I don't want to be going to Buc-ee's. But, it really brought to light that I have this anxiety over this place and this aversion to Buc-ee's. And I had bad waves of paranoia, right? And fear and loathing. So I just decided to avoid it altogether. I was like, what, best thing for me is to just not go to Buc-ee's. Plenty of other truck stops I can stop at. I think that's going to be the best thing for me. And that's what an excellent way to exercise samadhi, or right view, right? I have enough clear vision and enough insight of myself to know that if I just avoid Buc-ee's, no problem. That is, until one day I was shopping. I was just looking around on Marketplace and I saw this guitar that I really wanted. I was like, that's really awesome. So I messaged the lady about it and was like, hey, I would really like to buy your guitar. When can we meet? And she said, how about Tuesday, or whatever day it was? And I said, that's fine, sure. What time? 11 o'clock? Great. Where do you want to meet at? Buc-ee's. Of course she wanted to meet at Buc-ee's, right? Why wouldn't she want to meet at Buc-ee's? So I was forced to confront my fear of Buc-ee's. Like I said, it was like 11 o'clock in the morning, so this is like right at the peak of the chaos of Buc-ee's. Like this is when Buc-ee's is at its most jumping. And so right from the jump, I was like, how can I deal with this? How can I avoid it? What can I do? And then I started thinking about what can I do to combat this anxiety and this kind of irrational fear of Buc-ee's that I have. And I started thinking about, the practice and started thinking about the Metta Sutta. And for those of you who have not heard the Metta Sutta, so the Metta Sutta came about when the Buddha was alive and the monks and nuns would go on retreat. They would go to the forest in order to not trample the agriculture. So for the rainy season, they would go to the forest and retreat. And this lasted for about 3 months. And they would go, and in this particular case, they went to the forest at the foot of the Himalayas and set about practicing. And immediately, there's these tree devas, or tree ghosts, and they started harassing all the monks and the nuns and tearing at their clothing, clawing their skin, making horrible sounds and creating this really awful smell, just making it impossible for them to practice. And so the monks and nuns, they leave and they go back to the Buddha and they say, hey man, I don't know if you know this, but there's ghosts in there and it's making it impossible for us to practice right now. We can't meditate. They're making it impossible for us. And rather than the Buddha being like, oh, well, that's fine, you just stay here. And they said, no, go back. I want you to go back into the forest. And he said, this is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, unburdened with duties and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm, and wise and skillful, not proud or demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove. Wishing, in gladness and in safety, may all beings be at ease. Whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born, may all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another, or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another. Even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings. Radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will, whether standing or walking, seeing or lying down, free from drowsiness, one should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding. By not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desires, is not born again into this world. And so that's what they did. They went back to the forest and they wished ease to the tree devas. And it worked. And instead of harassing them and clawing at them and creating horrible smells and horrible noises, they actually began to assist these monks and nuns in their practice. They would shelter them from the rain, and they would provide food for them so that they could concentrate on their meditation practice. And so that's what I did with Buccee's. I just started using metta, and Buccee's inadvertently became part of my practice, and my Brahma Vihara practice in particular. And so from the moment that I learned I had to go to the place that I absolutely didn't want to go, I began offering myself metta. May I be at ease. May I be at peace. May I be kind and gentle with the Buccee's experience. And then I turned it to everyone at Buccee's. May everyone at Buccee's be at ease. May they be at peace, and may they be filled with kindness. And most of them were not at ease, just so we're clear. I mean, this is Buccee's we're talking about, and they were not at ease. But just because they were on edge didn't mean that I had to be. And so I leaned into that experience. And of course, it was still chaos, which is to be expected. But even just being with the experience rather than pushing it away was kind of a compassion exercise. It was an exercise in karuna. Just being with the psychological pain of being there in the first place. Just caring for that pain. Not avoiding it, but being with it. Caring for the fact that it was triggering and the fact that it induced this anxiety in me. And just welcoming that in. You can be here too, anxiety. You can be here too. Because in life, we're going to encounter a tremendous amount of pain and discomfort. That's entirely unavoidable. We're going to lose people that are close to us. We're going to have trouble paying our bills at times. We're not going to get the things we want. All this dukkha that's inherent with a human birth. Sickness, aging, death, not getting what we want, getting what we don't want. In this case, being at Buccee's in the first place was something I didn't want. And being around people that we don't necessarily want to be around. Like everybody at Buccee's. Have you ever seen those shirts that say good vibes only? It's like good vibes only, right? What an unrealistic expectation of life. To have good vibes only. And what a form of spiritual bypass. To think that everything's just going to be cool all the time. Everything's not going to be cool all the time. And, no judgment, because that's a natural reaction to pain. We're designed for survival, not for happiness. So we push away from pain. And we avoid going to Buccee's. But in reality, that's just avoidance. And being with the pain is where we find our awakening. The obstacles are the path. And so when I go into the melee that is Buccee's, and I start seeing all the families on vacation while I'm just trying to go about my day and get gas, and I start seeing all the people driving the really nice cars, and they're undoubtedly headed somewhere on vacation, all the out-of-state tags, and here I am. And at that time, my car was, every time I would put gas in my car, it's leaking gas all over the ground because I had a hole in my fuel line. And so I'm spilling my little bit of money on the ground while everybody's having their great vacation. And it's like, oh, now it's a mudita practice. May their happiness and joy increase. May their happiness and joy continue. So I could watch the kids be really excited because they're on a trip somewhere, going somewhere fun. And they're running around Buccee's and acting as children do in such a place. And I can see them having a good time, and then their joy becomes my joy. It's hard not to feel happy for kids that are happy. Just the smiles on their faces, the innocence. They haven't been crushed by life yet, so to speak. Good for them, I said, their happiness becomes my happiness. It's like that quote by the Dalai Lama that I love saying. It's like, if we only take happiness in our own happiness, we only find joy in the joys of our own life, then we miss out on 7 billion opportunities for joy. And so I start wishing everybody at Buccee's this mudita practice, may their happiness and joy increase. May their happiness and joy continue. And, I can watch the adults be frustrated, trying to navigate the parking lot or wrangle their joyous children. And they're just trying to get gas and get out of there. And I can genuinely care for their pain in that moment, because their pain is my pain. I can empathize with those adults, going through that situation. Because that place is a nightmare. Let's be realistic. That place is a wide awake nightmare, and I still don't enjoy it. But it is a valuable part of my practice now, and I don't avoid it now. As I said, the obstacles are the path. So just by leaning into this experience and bringing this sense of ease to the whole situation, and by being with the pain and finding some sense of joy in the experience, then I kind of come to a place of equanimity. So I'm able to cycle through every Brahma Vihara just at Buccee's, which is a pretty fun experience. And so, by applying these Brahma Viharas to Buccee's, it's, gone from being this wide awake nightmare to something that ultimately has strengthened my practice. Because if you can find equanimity at Buccee's, you can find it anywhere. And by being with the pains of life rather than avoiding them, we can begin to wake up and find this place of equanimity, wherever we are. And with whatever life throws at us. As I said, good vibes only it's a nice thought, but it's not always going to be good vibes. Sometimes life's going to be really difficult. But with this practice, we can find this right in the middleness of equanimity. And the awakening is our ability to be with pain. And the Buddha knew that. That's why the Four Noble Truths are at the core of this practice. He starts out with suffering because it's the most relatable. We all enjoy different things, but we all suffer the same way. We all worry about money. We all worry about our children. We all worry about our health. We all worry about losing people close to us. Has anybody here, I'm sure a couple of you have heard me talk about the acronym ELSA. Okay, Stephen Batchelor came up with this acronym for the Four Noble Truths, and it's profoundly beautiful. So it's ELSA. Has anybody seen Frozen? You remember Elsa's song?
Oh, yeah.
Let it go, right? So we let it go. So ELSA, we embrace the suffering in life. We don't avoid it. We lean into the pain. We let go of our reactivity. We see the awakening. And we apply the path. ELSA, E-L-S-A. So embrace the suffering, let go of the reactivity, and you will see the awakening by applying the path. So by just leaning into the pain, I turned what at face value was a negative experience into ultimately a positive one. And not, like I said, not that I enjoy going to Buc-ee's now, but I can be with it. I don't have to avoid it. And that's what this practice is about. You have to think that the monastics that have been practicing this for 2,600 years, they live under pretty harsh conditions most of the time. A lot of them live in the forest. There is a lot of these primal threats in the forest for them. In India, there's still tigers. They have to beg for their food. It's kind of a painful experience, but that's where they find their awakening, is within the pain. Just embracing the pain and turning it into joy. And we can do this in our everyday life and in our practice, by sitting with the pain that arises during meditation and caring for it rather than pushing it away. So if your leg starts to hurt while you're meditating, rather than adjusting, just lean into that pain. Make that your practice. This pain's going to happen. Life is going to hurt a fair amount. My friend Dave Smith has this quote that I love. He says, if you work in a paint store, you're going to get some paint on you. And if you're born into a human body, you're going to get some suffering on you. Mm-hmm. So don't run away from the painful parts of life and the uncomfortable parts of life. Lean into them and wake up to the fullness of the human experience. And so I hope that something in this talk has resonated for you. I talked about some of my personal reflections on fear and anxiety and some of the experiences I've had with those. I talked about what the Buddha said about it and the antidote that we should apply. And give you some ways to shift our experience, when these painful things arise. Fear and loathing at Buc-ee's. So if everybody wants to find a position that's upright and supportive, we'll move into a guided practice.